Hello, this is Rich Whitworth, editor of BioPharm International, and you're listening to the second part of an interview with Tarya Mottram, CEO of Action for Results.
Now, there was a key word that popped out at me when we were discussing this interview, which was, or a key phrase, I should say, design for value. Make design for value a reality. Perhaps you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so design for value, I think, is sort of another new topic, perhaps, in life sciences, and it's not new in that it's not that it hasn't really existed in the background all along. I think the difference is that really in the last few years, it's been more explicitly called out. And I believe actually one of the reasons why that's the case is that if you look at all the different trends that are going on in the world of healthcare, one of those big trends, and it's only one of them, is what's going on with healthcare reform and regulations across the globe. Of course, here in the United States, that the healthcare reform is a big topic right now, even in the elections. But what that means is there is a huge focus from a national perspective across the globe on healthcare outcomes and needing to be able to actually show a definite impact on those outcomes. There's also the other things that you will see there's a lot of reimbursement scrutiny that's in different levels depending a little bit which part of the world you reside. That plays out slightly differently. And then with those two, what is also happening is that companies have to be able to show improved evidence. And so that puts a sort of an added burden, if you will, on the development effort to create that evidence early on. So that, we could talk about a lot of different things as to what that means to implications to companies, but at a very basic level, when we think about redefining value, I think in the past we sort of thought about, well, we'll come up with these product claims, but really when companies were talking about success factors or trade-offs that they had to manage, it was a trade-off between the scope of the development program, which was largely defined by the claims, the cost, and the time to market. And as long as we knew kind of how to manage those three trade-offs relatively well, we could get a successful product out there. And that's a very simple model. What I think we have to add to that model. So that model hasn't gone away. That's still a valid trade-off equation to look at. But there's another triangle, I think, that comes ahead of it, which is understanding sustainable healthcare value first. So sustainable healthcare value, the way the market's defining that, is based on understanding the patient's needs, first of all, and patients are getting much more informed around their, affecting their own healthcare outcomes and have a lot more to say these days. Understanding the physician or the provider view of that and what's going on there. So the physician environments are changing dramatically as well, and we're looking at very different provider models. And then finally, also understanding the payer side of that. So when we think about sustainable healthcare value, the healthcare system is made out of those three stakeholders, if you will. So when we think about product claims and what product claims we should choose, we have to very carefully think about what healthcare value looks like based on that equation, and then based on that define those product claims. And certain claims will get better reimbursement, but there are other trade-offs that may be going along with that. And so if we start thinking about it that way, then I think more and more companies, what we hear now is they talk about value leadership. And I love that because value leadership is very different from price leadership or cost leadership and those things that we used to talk about even just a few years back. Value leadership means that I may not always have the best pricing even, but if in fact, and this is especially true if I'm looking at targeted populations, certain indications that are tough, so this doesn't necessarily, so I think the old model of having a breakthrough that touches the masses that model's kind of out the door in that we can only have so many of those. So as we become more targeted in the markets that we're going after, as we look at the indications by population, patient and customer benefit becoming very, very clear on that becomes more and more important. Improved treatment outcomes, being able to actually show over time that improvement on treatment outcomes becomes more important. So value leadership also means that companies are increasingly spending time before they commercialize, making sure that we have the right data, but also post-market studies are focusing more and more on the treatment outcomes now. So that's sort of a value-based model that I think changes the metrics on the industry side. And then, you said, well, yeah, design for value, then how do you do that? So I think, first of all, one is the company has to really acknowledge that that model means a different kind of metric for them. It's a metric that isn't as short-term. It's a metric that actually needs to think about investments in a very different way. But once that's done, then design for value at the project level means that we have to be very, very focused on understanding what that target product profile looks like, own it from a very different perspective in our cross-functional teams. And I guess, I talk about sort of value-driven clinical program design, where that target product profile gets at the unmet customer and clinical needs. Those are ranked. We understand absolutely what the key value drivers are there. And we also understand the trade-offs that are inherent around those. So, somewhere in my files I have this favorite slide that I like to bring up a lot when I talk to people, and I get very passionate about this. So, target product profile is kind of in the middle of that slide, and and I have 5 bubbles, and I say, okay, so these 5 bubbles around target product profile are the things that are the trade-offs. So, you can make individual choices in these bubbles, but that's what gets you in trouble. And those 5 bubbles, I'm going to tell you what they are. One is clarity of the unmet needs, and really, and that's kind of the driver that goes into the TPP. So criticality of those needs and the size of the medical cap and the novelty of that drives a lot of the choices that we have to make. Commercial viability is another one, and that has a lot of things inside of it, including the competitive profile but also things like manufacturing cost and those kinds of things. So we make choices around that. Cost in general, which includes even our clinicals and the number of costs of patients. Again, we make choices around that. And so this, we make choices around how we deal with risk and probability of technical success. So for instance, do we invest in early proof of concept, which is a huge investment, or not? That's a choice and a trade-off. And then finally, time. The time hasn't gone away. We still have to look at that time. But our clinical complexity is a trade-off when we think about time. And so are other things, regulatory complexity included. So when we put those bubbles together and we put the target product profile in the middle, what it tells us then is every time we make a choice, anywhere in our team or in our organization, and it touches one of those bubbles, we can't just make that choice. We have to go back and say, all right, what's that going to do to that target product profile and the value and the outcomes that we set out to deliver? And are we still, what's the best possible way to work through this maze? And that's an ongoing process. It doesn't happen just once during the development or twice. It happens almost weekly or monthly. And it happens at the governance level. It happens also at the team level. So teaching organizations how to do that type of trade-off conversation, deep conversations and debates around scenarios and kind of strategic pathways that give us the best outcomes, that's what we have to get good at. And we're not good at that as an industry right now. This is a place where the entire industry has a lot of learning to do.
Right, that's partially the idea of the cross-functional competencies that you also mentioned. Which areas are lacking there, would you say?
Yes, it depends a little bit on the company, but I think that actually what's pretty amazing, by the way, on this one is functional competences are very strong in a lot of companies, and certainly if you also look at some of the larger companies, even pharmaceutical companies that have been out there for a long, long time, functionally pretty strong, cross-functionally still pretty weak. And it's sometimes very amazing to me to see companies who've been in business for years and years and years and are global and are still struggling with some really basic things. So when I talk about cross-functional competencies, they are the things that bring us together so that we really truly can deliver a product with the right value at the right time. And so we talk about things like, so for instance, most companies have put in cross-functional teams. But if you think about how those teams are operating today, or if you go and actually watch them, what you'll see is that they're much more working groups, perhaps at best, that come together and they do their status and work a little bit of interdependency here and there. But what you don't see is cross-functional deep engagement. You don't see people actually, those trade-off conversations that I just talked about. You don't hear them very much. And so understanding what cross-functionality actually means, we have a long way to go there. Understanding what it means also and how we empower those teams to make choices and make decisions better is another element that I think a lot of companies are lacking. So while we've been building functional excellence, we've forgotten that in that process, that part of functional excellence is actually building the functional systems to a point of maturity that allow cross-functional engagement to take place without people having to run back to their management to ask for permission. And then I think the other thing that we see a lot is it's that marriage of science and business again at the team level is there needs to be an ongoing understanding of what really matters from both perspectives. And I think we actually sometimes don't have enough of the types of questioning that needs to happen on both sides within the teams, or even at the governance level. And one of the things that I do a lot is I work with executive teams, and I help them put in place governance systems, so either portfolio processes or gate processes. And it's amazing how much time we sometimes use thinking through what questions are appropriate to be asking when projects come for certain gate decisions. In my opinion, actually, the questions aren't tough enough. And so consequently what's happened is that our gate processes that many companies now have, and they were supposed to be kind of funnels so that we discern the best products out of many products very early on and put our investment to the best bets, if you will. They become tunnels. They're not effective funnels. We let too many risky projects go through, and then we continue to have a very, very high late development failure rate. So deep scientific insight on one hand to understand scientifically what the questions are that are sort of the make or break choices that we have to make in the early stages especially is crucially important. And then similarly, deep understanding of what creates business value and what are the few factors that we have to manage very, very carefully. And I guess, I don't know how much more you want to hear about competencies, but I guess I would say there's a couple other areas that are sort of near and dear to my heart, and I do think that these are very trainable areas, if you will. I believe that life sciences companies fundamentally have to accept the fact that they are project-based companies. And so, 90% of their operation depends on projects. And so that in and of itself is a capability that needs to be built. And so a lot of companies, the larger companies out there, are starting to put in place project management offices, for instance, which is good. But sometimes it can also kind of turn back to haunt them because we tend to think of project management as yet another functional area, when project management is actually a cross-functional capability. So two things need to happen. Yeah, we need cross-functional project management knowledge, if you will, and skill that includes the processes, the methods, and tools. And then we need some of these very, very strong project leaders who really, really understand how to lead programs and projects. And then the other thing that I see a lot is we don't make a distinction between programs and projects. And so we put rookies to drive large programs and get ourselves in trouble more often than not. So there's a lot to be done, I think, really understanding program management and project management as core disciplines and not separating them out of the product development life cycles, but really integrating them right in there and understanding them as competencies that we have to grow organization-wide, regardless of where we are, including manufacturing. You're hitting all my hot topics here.
Well, that's exactly what we want to hear. And I guess we're almost running out of time here, but maybe you can give us a little bit of a conclusion in that where you see things moving over the next maybe 5 to 10 years, and which trends you think will settle and which ones may disappear over that time.
Oh, 5 to 10 years, right? So now you make me do the forward-looking piece, right?
That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think that by the way, design for value is here to stay. So what's going to happen there is we're going to see a shakeup probably in the industry. We'll see some companies emerge as very strong with that. Some are already starting to in the pharma side. We're watching them carefully, and I think that will drive a very different way of thinking about the business. I think what we'll also see is, and this is sort of an interesting dilemma for me to see is what actually happens with partnering and co-development. So co-development, when we haven't actually talked about that today, but since you are asking about futures, it's very relevant to recognize that we see more and more co-development effort. And that's yet another competency, by the way, that it's not just about, let's just go get a partnership and off we go. There are a lot of different elements to doing co-development very well, including understanding how to manage alliances and relationships better. But I do think that actually is an absolute trend that's going to continue. Companies that are thinking about it strategically will do better. And what I mean by that is not just looking at it as kind of everyday partnering, but truly building partnerships that have clear goals, partnerships that have those goals been translated to operational mechanisms and processes that keep them very current. So I think we're going to see a continuation of that. And that will change the model between the large companies and the small companies. And my hope is, and this is my kind of a subjective hope here, that we'll learn to do also acquisitions and mergers very differently as a result of it. Because I think today, large companies have a lot to offer. They have a lot of that process knowledge. They have a lot of that business acumen. That small companies who haven't put a product out there are still trying to learn. So, but, they go after the small company partly because that entrepreneurial spirit and that incredible scientific discovery that's been going on there. And then try to merge it too tightly so that we lose the essence of what that small company had to offer. And we actually, don't gain necessarily the benefit of the infrastructure of the larger company. So we need to understand that those are two separate processes. They're two separate capabilities, if you will. And I do think that we headed that way. So as we're thinking about how therapeutic area strategies can get better, we can also think about sort of how research needs to play out in organizations and how we give it its right time and space, and how we also measure it by different metrics. And then we understand the operational side slightly differently. One is largely about, operation is largely about efficiency, and discovery is largely about effectiveness. and so there's a different set of metrics there. I think if we can get good at understanding the difference and bring the organizations together to collaborate, but not try to force fit a set of metrics on processes, that doesn't make sense. So I think that's an important thing. And then I think on the competency side, I do think that we will see that some organizations will emerge as spending a lot more time thinking what kind of leadership they need to actually develop systematically. And I think that leadership also very much on the scientific side, tied to more of a very targeted business strategy. I think that you'll see also a heavy emphasis on getting better at kind of the collaboration science and engagement inside a company, and coming up with very different team models that start playing out in a much more I guess I would say we'll see a higher team productivity as a result of that. So that's sort of my hope for the future. I do think a lot is going to change. And that's partly why it's such an exciting place to be.
Well, and change is often good, so we all look forward to that, I think.
Well, I think we all look forward to it until it hits us, and then sometimes it can be a little scary.
It's good afterwards, perhaps, but maybe not at the time.
Well, I think what we have to understand about change is good, and theoretically we're all kind of buying into it, but it also is very often personal. So to do change well, so to speak, means that we have to be able to translate it to something really concrete ultimately for the individual in the organization. And so when we talk about leadership, I think that's the work of the leader, is that we don't just come up with the change agenda, but we have to translate that agenda in very, very pragmatic direction for the organization. And when we do that well, we succeed, and we excite our organization. That's the industry is such a wonderful industry, because the people who decide to work in this industry, they really care. They don't just care about their job, and they don't just care about their paycheck. They care about the human being that they affect. They want to make lives better. And so it's easy to excite the population that works in this industry, and it's easy to give them the promise of the change, I find, because they really want to make a difference. So I think it's upon leaders in the organization to really make outcomes the focus of the organization, and help people see how they are, in fact, no matter where they are in the organization, how they are affecting truly healthcare outcomes. And that's an incredible thing to be able to be part of. So yes, it's exciting, and we need to do it well, and we need to grow in the process.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Tarja. It's been very interesting to talk to you, and also very interesting to hear about your kind of future expectations. So thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll be able to speak to you again, maybe on some of those topics in a little bit more detail. Thank you very much.
Would love to. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.